All right, guys, I'm Nicolette, and today Brian and I are here with Romeo Durscher. He is the VP of Public Safety over at Auterion, and he's going to talk to us a little bit today about what Auterion does in the drone world. And we are going to talk about open source. We're going to talk about drone security. We're going to talk about hardware, software. We're going to talk about a lot of drone-related things. So thank you so much for joining us today, Romeo. We do appreciate your time.
Hello, Nicolette. Hello, Brian. This is going to be a fun discussion. I'm really looking forward to it.
Us too. Yeah. Why don't you kick us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background. I know you come from some other pretty cool companies as well, and what you're doing over here at Auterion.
Yes. So you may have detected a slight accent. I was born and raised in Switzerland, but then in the late 1990s, I moved to California because it was my childhood dream to work on a space mission. And, in Switzerland, we do a lot of great stuff. We do chocolates and Swiss Army knives and watches, but not so much space stuff. So I came over to the US and I ended up working on a few space missions for almost 13 years. And then exactly 10 years ago, my best friend, he invited me over to his house. He said, Romeo, you got to come and see this thing. And I'm like, okay, I'm already intrigued. So I went to his house and it looked like a bomb had hit his house. There were electronic components all over the place. And on the coffee table is this weird looking device that has 6 arms and 6 propellers and a see-through dome with all these technology pieces inside it. And I'm like, what is this? And he's like, oh, I just got this from China. I had to build everything together. There's no English translations in the manual, but let's go out and fly. And mind you, at the time we lived in downtown San Jose, California. Right. So close to an airport in the middle of a big city. And we're in this local park flying this thing that neither of us had ever flown before. And that was the first time I got introduced to these new devices that we call drones now, consumer drones. And I was completely fascinated by this thing. And over the years, we started incorporating other tech into this drone technology because he was doing a lot of accident reconstruction. And aerial views are always needed. And instead of renting a helicopter or buying expensive satellite imagery, we were now putting a GoPro camera on this thing and we were capturing shots from above. And all of this led me to starting to work at DJI, which people may know as the leading drone manufacturer, especially on the consumer side, but also now on the commercial, the enterprise side. And I spent almost 7 years there, really focusing on the integration of this new technology into public safety, from your fire department to your search and rescue to your law enforcement and humanitarian organizations, because it was clear to me that having the capability to see something from above has a tremendous benefit for these organizations. And then I came to the point where I hit kind of like the ceiling of my vision because, my previous employer is a closed operating system, not very standardized. There's some data security concerns that came because it was a Chinese manufactured device. And so I was like, okay, I want to put more work into my vision of how these connected or how these drones are becoming these connected devices. And I found, or I had already followed this Swiss company, Auterion, that was really working on exactly that vision. And so I joined them earlier this year, and boy, has this been an adventure.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about what Auterion does? Because I know there's software, but we talked about this. There are some hardware components, so it's a really unique sort of proposition they have.
Yeah, it is. It really is very different. So while our focus really is on software, on the open source side, there is one piece of hardware that really makes all of this possible. So if we look at a drone, there's an autopilot inside the flight controller. And that's really what I like to call the brain of the drone. It executes all the needed commands to make this thing not only fly, but that we have the payloads, the cameras, or the sensors, that everything works properly together. And Dr. Lawrence Meyer, our CEO, he developed Pixhawk, the autopilot flight controller that is really well known in the drone industry and is one of the most used flight controller. So he developed that in 2008. And so his vision was, okay, once we have these devices flying, then we really need to connect them with each other. So we built this one hardware piece that is in essence a flight controller, but also a connectivity device and a mission computer. So think of it in essence as a modem that now starts to connect to a network and the computer behind it, so you can run certain applications also on board. Because we have really learned that the drone is, in most cases, in 95% of the cases, a data collection device. Only in those cargo delivery operations, which right now are, not that common, there it's about the hardware, it's delivering something. But beyond those applications, it's about the data. And you want to get actionable data as quickly as possible to where they are needed. And so that's where the whole connectivity comes into play. But being also part of the open source, there's also now the opportunity to start standardizing these devices. And that is tremendously important, not only in public safety, but other verticals, so that you have a proper standard to communicate with these devices, that you have a ground control station that you can use for more than just one drone, multiple drones, or other robotics that are maybe on the ground, on the water, underwater. And suddenly it becomes scalable. And that is our mission.
So let's talk a little bit more about the open source aspect, because I think that, you were very excited about that when we first started talking about that. How powerful is this concept of open source in this space?
Nicolette, when I worked at DJI and I helped develop a lot of the solutions that are being used today in not only public safety, but in a lot of enterprise, I worked with a system that was very closed. But that became my reality. That became what I thought was, the norm. And yes, we had an SDK, and yes, we allowed software developers to get access to the system to create solutions on top of it, but it was very limited. So then I come into this open source world, and I was thinking, hey, I know this industry. I know the drone industry. And I had to admit to myself, boy, I really don't know the industry, because there's so much amazing stuff happening on the open source side, because you have this community of developers that provide input and that can solve issues. And then you have a company like Auterion that takes this code that has been developed and massages it so that it becomes enterprise ready, so it becomes user friendly in a way. Because, most developers may not have the right understanding of how a feature or function should look and feel to the end user. So we take all of that, we make it available then as a clean and nice product. And with the open source also come the open standards. And so now we can really start to standardize so many components. And that has completely changed my view of the drone and the robotics industry. So it's been a fantastic learning experience the last 12 months. And I'm still, there's so much more I need to learn, because I've just not been exposed to it.
Right. Do you think with it being open source, right, you're going to find that more and more users are, especially on the consumer level, are going to use this type of connection, and eventually you'll have more autonomousness, I don't even know if that's the word, autonomy inside of drones, because now you're sourcing it through, everyone's sourcing it through the same sort of data source and same controls?
Yes, absolutely. And I think another big advantage is that this is now, community driven. It's not a company saying this is the way it has to be. So it's the input from so many, and you're developing a solution based on many people. So you have transparency as well. It's a community approach. And I think that is the way we need to go forward, because we are facing some very interesting questions like, AI and machine learning. Do we want an entity that dictates us how we use AI and what it is and where the data goes? Or do we want to have a community approach where we as a society figure out ourselves from multiple regions and multiple cultures and multiple languages what this new field of AI looks like and how it's being applied and how it's being governed and what the security features are? So I think there is a lot of benefit. I mean, open source is not something new. We've seen it in the computer industry, but in the drone industry, it's still a very unknown concept. And that has become a little bit my mission to help educate about open source, because the first fear that I always hear is, well, but because it's open source, it's not safe.
Yeah.
And I think that's just the wording open that kind of evokes that feeling, when in reality, it is as safe, if not safer, because you have a whole different approach on reviewing the code and the safety features behind it. So it's very fascinating.
And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about safety and security when it comes to data collection as well. But yes, that is always top of mind.
Right. So, and it is open source, right? And to Nicolette's point, with data and security, are users allowed to share certain data with each other, or is it like, is there a part of it where you could share information? Because as there's more and more drones out there, right, and more drones are flying around, you would sort of want to know where they are, almost like air traffic control, right? I need to know where all these pieces are if we're all flying in the same area. So is data going to eventually be shared if users want it to be shared?
Oh, Brian, this is such a fascinating topic, because yes, so we're integrating now drones into more everyday life applications, and we're sharing the same airspace as crewed aircraft, from your helicopters to your fixed wing airplanes, private or enterprise or passenger aircraft. So there's a few things that are happening right now. For one, here in the United States, we have now a project that in essence assigns an electronic license plate to that drone, so that you know who's behind that drone flight. So very, very appropriate. The time has come that, everyday people should know what is that drone doing up there? And by using this remote ID, that's the first step of providing also more transparency. And then the next step is properly integrating these uncrewed vehicles into the crewed traffic airspace. And that's a project that the FAA is leading, and NASA has a big stake on it as well. And then other entities around the globe are also working on that, because eventually we will have more of these autonomous devices flying in certain areas, in certain potentially corridors, where it's safe and appropriate, and where they communicate with each other where they are, and communicate also with the other airplanes where we have people inside, so that we have a safe environment. But then comes the other part. These drones are, for right now, a lot of them are because of the data. We want to see something. We want to potentially map an area, or we're using it for wildfire mitigation. So it's about the data, and we want to share that data with the applicable individuals or entities that should have access to it. So that means these drones have to be connected, and they have to have a proper network and a security feature in the background that allows the sharing of data. And then if we want to take this even further, I'll give you a good example. In 2017, I deployed to the first wildfire here in California. And for the first time, we were flying drones during and after the wildfire. We had to be properly integrated because there was a lot of activity in the air with fire, dropping of water over the fire line. And we had to get separation. We had to take all this data, and this data afterwards became very, very valuable to other entities, from the insurance companies that wanted to see the damage to city planners that wanted to think about rebuilding and how can we rebuild it better. So there are multiple stakeholders that would love to get access to that data that was collected at a later point, but where is that data, and how can we make it so that we take data today, but over the next 5 years, entities that should get access to it have access? So there's a lot of things that we still have to properly figure out. But one thing we learned is during a natural disaster, we're collecting so much helpful data that helps so many people down the line in speeding up insurance claims to rebuilding permits and different type of rebuilding processes, that we need to get that data to where it matters.
Yeah. And I think the point is too, like especially with, like, for instance, a wildfire, there's places that are not necessarily accessible to human beings or even manned, aircraft because, of safety precautions.
We're talking about wildfires, but what other applications? I mean, as VP of Public Safety, I know you're also dealing in other, safety situations. Where else are you seeing the benefits here, or potential benefits even?
Yeah, so obviously, my focus from the beginning was very much on emergency response, and I've worked on many projects here in the US as well as in Europe. And what we realized very quickly is on the fire side, there are so many opportunities. Let's say we have a structure fire and a unit arrives on scene, but they have this ground level view of what is happening in front of them. They don't know what's happening on the other side of the building. They don't know what it looks like from above. They may not know where the heat source is. And by using this drone, we have the ability to navigate the camera in 3D space. So we can go around the building very quickly and see what it looks on the other side. We have thermal cameras on it that we can see heat sources. So actionable data comes to the incident commander in a much faster way. Search and rescue, we're looking for a missing person. Obviously, having an aerial perspective always helps. And now sending the drone to areas where it may be more dangerous to go for the ground units is another benefit. So the mitigation of risk to our first responders is a huge advantage. And then, of course, we have the law enforcement side where we're assisting our officers with data that they otherwise wouldn't have. It could be a vehicle takedown where the individual inside the vehicle doesn't want to come out, and we send a drone with a speaker on it and with a spotlight to communicate instead of sending in a unit on the ground. Or we have a high-risk warrant arrest where a SWAT team is just about to enter this building where they want to do some takedowns. But we may have people that jump out the window on the backside of the home, and now we have eyes on scene. There's so many applications, and it ends up being two things. One, we're helping the community by providing data to incident commanders that can allow them to make better and faster decisions. And number two, we're mitigating risks to our first responders and emergency workers, and transparency, because everything that is being seen and filmed is also then part of evidence if this goes into review, and it just is another tool in the toolbox.
So do you find that, or maybe even, like what percent of like first responders, whether fire, police, are actually using drones? Is it a big portion of these agencies that are using them, or is it still relatively small?
It is a big percentage, and I can give you some numbers. So in the US, we have about roughly 40,000 fire and police departments. So that's a pretty large number. And out of those 40,000 departments, only 500 have access to a helicopter or a fixed wing aircraft. So those are, usually your bigger cities that have a police helicopter or an airplane. And then you have all these others that do not have access to aerial assets. Mm-hmm. And now we have roughly about 2,000 plus departments in the US that have a drone program. That's fire and law enforcement. So it's a very beneficial technology that has already gotten a huge acceptance rating. And we have only touched the surface of the iceberg in regards to the possibilities and the integration and the implementation of this technology. But it's very encouraging. And globally, we have almost 800 documented cases where the drone saved a life. And those are just documented cases. There's many, many more that are not documented, but those are 800 people that are still with us today, thousands of family members and friends that are not mourning a person. Mm-hmm. And there are thousands of cases where we helped mitigate risks to our first responders. So less injury, less death within a department, which has a huge cost impact on taxes. So really, this drone technology and the robotics in general have become a tool that has gained global attraction in the emergency response market.
So I'm going to go back to data for a second and security, because as these agencies are collecting data, or other sectors that are using these drones, how is the data being stored, and what about folks who are concerned about privacy in that aspect?
Yes, those are very, very important aspects, and what we have to be careful as a society is that we're not singling out one technology over another. There are already privacy laws in place. For example, if somebody is in your backyard and is taking a picture of you inside your home, you potentially are already protected by privacy laws. There's no difference if it's now a drone. So we have laws in place that protect one's privacy. Now the question is, how are we storing this data? Well, data is nothing new for public safety. For example, body cameras in law enforcement, they capture a lot of amount of data that then goes into the system. Exxon is one of the leading manufacturers of body cams. They also have the software that helps offload that data immediately into a secure environment that is protected, where you can see who is getting access. So the data integrity is also there. So when this goes in front of a judge, for example, that there's a trail visible of who was watching that data, when did anything get manipulated, because that's another big concern with data. It's gotten easier and easier to adjust an image or a video, and so you want to have that data, protection in essence. Right. So departments, data is nothing new to them. They have data policies that are being reviewed by the city, by city attorney offices, by county attorney, on a county level or on a state level. So this is just another form of data that is now being provided, and the public has the opportunity to request access to the data. If they think that a drone was flying over the house and it was a police drone, then they can submit a request to see that data, and that is being made public. So I think a lot of great pieces are being put in place and have been put in place to feel or give us the sense that this technology is not just used to spy on people. In fact, police departments have very strict regulations on when they can use the drone and when they cannot use the drone. And just general surveillance is not an approved application of this technology.
Right. So it's almost like whatever laws exist in terms of your privacy, just they roll over to the drone to some degree, right? Yeah. So it's like whatever your local laws are, I guess, or your state laws, or wherever, is basically how your privacy is going to be even applied with drone data.
And that's the way it should be. We cannot single out one technology because now think about it. You have a police helicopter that has a sophisticated camera system on the belly of the helicopter that flies at a higher altitude, potentially has even more capabilities. Should these be treated differently than the drone or a ground-based camera? No, they should be treated exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, can you talk a little bit about, I know we talked about you guys manufacture one hardware piece, right? And how can you talk a little bit about that piece of hardware?
Yes. So I like to call the brain of the drone, the autopilot, the flight controller, really that central piece that makes all the decisions. Mm-hmm. And to date, the way we fly drones is, we have a ground control station that usually has 2 sticks. And that by itself is very, very ancient. It's over 100 years old that we use 2 sticks to manipulate an aircraft in flight. But there is the communication from you as the operator on the ground to the drone that goes into the flight controller, then executes all the little things that need to be executed to do what I just wanted the drone to do. So all of that happens on the flight controller. So it gives more power to the propellers or, goes up and down depending on what it is that we want to do, adjusts the camera, the settings on the camera, all of that. And then we also say, okay, we want to have this data connected and we want to have it live. So inside the flight controller, we also have a connectivity device. And now I can connect my drone to either a 4G, 5G open network, or I can create my own private network and connect the drone to it. Now I see live what is happening, what the drone is seeing. I also see all the health data from the vehicle. So if suddenly a motor becomes hotter than the other one, I see that, I get alerts. And then I have potentially the need to do maybe some mission planning or mission execution or data analysis on board so that I get actionable data, not just data, because that's, I think, another problem. We get overwhelmed with data. And I say about 80 to 90% of drone data is useless to me. There's only a good 10% of that image or of that video that I'm seeing that is of importance to me. All the rest I have to filter out. And we humans, we get sometimes overwhelmed because so many data pieces are being thrown at us, especially in a life-saving situation where you have multiple data sources that come at you and you as an incident commander have to really pick and choose what's important. So if we can already limit to the data, filter the data in essence on board and only send back to the ground what is important, we're already helping that whole process. So that's what we're doing with what we call SkyNode. And SkyNode is that flight controller with the mission computer and the connectivity. We make that available to drone manufacturers so they can, in essence, take that piece of hardware that has the flight software stack on it and build their drone around it. That allows them to go to market much quicker. They don't have to reinvent the wheel, in essence. They don't have to invest into flight software. They already have this proven technology and really can focus on their expertise, and that is the drone and potentially the payload. So it really helps, and that allows us to build an ecosystem, because we learned very quickly on that there is no one drone that works for all the different mission requirements. We need smaller drones, larger drones, heavy lift drones. We need drones with a fixed wing. We need drones that can carry certain pieces. So if we provide an ecosystem of solutions from the drone to cameras to payloads, then we're bringing flexibility and choices to the end users. And that's exactly what's needed right now.
So you also mentioned that, there's a lot of data, right, coming from these drones, and some of it is used for the drone and some of it's to relay back to whatever the ground control. So is some of this being done via like edge computing? So like, for instance, like it's sensing obstacles near it. So it's keeping that, on the drone, but it's also then sending that back. Whereas some of the data is sending it back. Does the controller also do that? The flight control?
Yes, exactly. And we want to do, in essence, a lot of that that data analysis on board, because in the future, right now, we're very much still limited to line of sight deployments. Right. So as far as I can see the drone, but clearly there are applications where beyond visual line of sight is needed. And therefore, that means we may even break the link between the ground control and the drone. So that means the drone needs to have onboard decision-making capabilities, like sense and avoid. And that needs to run on the edge on the drone. But then we can also put machine learning on there. Let's say we're doing a search and rescue operation, and we have a program that helps us detect anything that looks like a body. So maybe we have, an arm sticking out underneath a bush. And so very easy for a spotter to miss. You blink and you miss it. So now running AI on it can help us detect those items that we may as a human being miss. And that needs to run also on the drone, on the edge, so that we get that data as quickly as possible to the ground.
When you talk about all these smarter features in AI, one thing I was curious about was kind of your vision for the future of smarter drones. So, I mean, maybe these are things that are happening now or potentially happening very soon. But when we look 5-10 years from now, where could we be?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics because, 10 years ago, I didn't think that I would be doing this a decade later. We have come a long way the past 10 years. And my job didn't even exist 7 years ago. So that also shows you the challenge. There's a need for 100,000 new individuals within the next 2 to 3 years in the drone industry, but we don't even know what their job title or what the qualifications are. And that to me is fascinating, that we are at this point. And we have honestly only tipped the surface of what is possible. We're seeing drones doing medical deliveries over a huge distance in Africa. We're seeing drones that are doing 2D and 3D mapping of areas of interest so that we can better study potential wildfire impacts or trying to prevent events from happening by studying and comparing the data sets with each other in ways that we were not able to do before. We're seeing drones being used on the creative side. Pretty much every movie and every TV show, especially I just got back from Europe, every TV show there has drone footage in it. It gives us a new perspective that's easily and fairly cheaply integrated into the storytelling aspect. So a lot has happened, and yet we have not even gotten to the point of multiple units working together in sync. Imagine a search and rescue, a search for a 4-year-old that is missing, and we have 10 drones that are in sync, flying out there, working with each other and the ground units. I mean, that's extremely powerful.
Right. And because they're programmable, you could map out the area, right? They could divide and go, okay, I'm going to search this path. You search, so.
Exactly. So you're spreading it out. You're aligning. You make them a connected device. They're sharing data. They're sharing information with the ground. So that brings us to that whole connectivity. It is now we're at 5G, and it's a beautiful thing. And we haven't really tapped into the potential of 5G. But imagine these platforms now being connected and operated via 5G. So I don't have to take out my drone to the field. If I do a power line inspection, the inspector doesn't have to be in the field anymore. He can stay in the office and watch everything unfold and potentially even control the camera or the drone so that he or she gets to see exactly what needs to be seen. So we're changing the way we are operating, and the technology will continue to improve. We will get better drones. We'll get better batteries. You had a show very recently about wireless charging of batteries. Drones will become a piece where we have very little interaction with, because they will be charged wirelessly, data will be offloaded wirelessly. They go into a hub, they stay in the hub until they're needed again. That is going to happen. And we will integrate ground robotics. And that to me is the future. It will make jobs more efficient, more safe, and it will not take away jobs. It will create jobs. It will shift from one function to another. And I think that's also an important piece. In the beginning, the manned pilots, the crewed pilots, were very worried about drones, not only because of the safety factor, but hey, they're going to take away our jobs. Well, that hasn't happened. In fact, we have helicopter pilots that have become drone pilots in the police, because they bring that knowledge, the aviation knowledge, and they integrate it into now this unmanned vehicle, and they enjoy it as much as they did enjoy flying their helicopters. So it's a shift. It's not a replacement. It's a shift of jobs that is happening.
So, Brian, do you have anything else you'd like to ask?
No, I think we answered some of the future stuff, which is usually my question. I mean, it's crazy. We see drones, aerial drones on Mars now. I mean, it's pretty crazy. It's everywhere. So
it is. And when I left my NASA, so I thought I would never work as cool of a place as NASA. And the Mars helicopter had just started as a project. And I was thinking to myself back then, man, this would be so cool to work on that project. And then, adding a few years to it, Mars rover for the first time, or the Mars helicopter for the first time, takes off on Mars. And it's like, holy cow, how far we've come that we can do this in an atmosphere that is, 1% of Earth's atmosphere, and it's working. It's incredible. So I think this technology really will continue to provide us with more and more benefits. And yes, there will be challenges, and yes, there will be concerns, but we have the opportunity to address all of that as a community. And that to me is also very exciting.
If you could, Romeo, could you let us know where we can learn more about Auterion and anything you've got going on over there?
Yes, absolutely. So Auterion on the web, it's auterion.com. We're also on Twitter and Facebook and all the social media outlets, YouTube and Instagram. I'm a little bit like you, Nicolette. I love telling stories. I'm a storyteller. I'm a visual person, and I love adding context to stories. And sometimes when you work with engineers, they're not used to that. They have a very different mindset. And this has also been a lot of fun by bringing our internal engineers out into the field and creating content with them and showing them how fun it is to tell the story behind, this new feature, or why are we doing an ecosystem. And I love that aspect, that I really can also tell a story. And having been in the industry now for 10 years, there's so much that can be told. So thank you that I got an opportunity to share a little bit on your podcast. And I hope if people have questions, they can also look me up. I love to engage with people. I think we have an opportunity to educate the next generation of explorers and scientists and researchers and engineers that are working with this new technology, that are working with data and data workflows and data security items that we're not even thinking about yet. So this has been fun.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks again. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you both.